I pressed go live.
We are broadcasting.
Live. Okay, so Phil, Helen, can you rearrange the screens momentarily so we're in a better position? Welcome. Hoping that this is live now on YouTube. So I'm assuming it is. And welcome to everyone who is joining us live for this Q&A. Thank you so much for booking on Eventbrite, like a lot of you have done, or coming directly via the link here. Let me just give you a brief introduction. My name's Paul Reed. Also
Paul,
yeah.
Paul, we're broadcasting double.
What does that mean, Anthony? What does that mean, Anthony?
I'm hearing an echo.
You're hearing an echo. Okay. Anyone got any ideas why we might be echoing?
We could try to turn off our individual microphones until it's time for us to speak. Just a suggestion.
Good plan. Anthony, is that any better?
I think it's coming through YouTube. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because you got two streams.
Okay, let me just carry on then. For those of you who just joined us live, don't disappear. Hang on. Let's go back to the introduction again. Welcome to this Q&A, live Q&A. Sorry about that. It's live. We're bound to make a few issues here and there, a few errors. We're bound to stumble about. It's live. It's not pre-recorded. Welcome to the live Q&A with me, Paul Reed. I'm also known as the teapotmOnk, and my panel that are here to answer your questions on mind-body practices in the uncertain times in which we live at the moment. And what does that mean? Well, there are three background issues really to why we're doing this podcast. The first is clearly COVID, how it is and how it has been restricting the ways in which we interact and our ability to both teach and learn these different arts. The second factor that's brought about this broadcast and the need to go live with this Q&A is the incredible pace of change in the ways that we communicate. Both the internet and social media have changed forever the way that we are doing this. But what role is the domination of such digital culture having on our professions as mind-body artists? The pressure to not only gather the equipment and become experts in all of this overnight, is this pressure a force for good or for bad? So we're going to look at both of those, plus one other factor which has thrown everything up in the air at the moment. If you combine these two previous ideas, these changes, and you add to that the fact that we are undergoing huge changes ourselves in the way that we conduct ourselves as teachers and as students, we need to ask ourselves questions about how transparent and accountable we are. And perhaps this is the time to do that. We're relearning old patterns, we're looking at new methods, and we're investigating new insights and tools. So to help us answer these questions and the questions that you're submitting, hopefully now on YouTube or throughout this session, are an esteemed panel of specialists in many different fields. And we're going to introduce them to you briefly now in this section of the broadcast. Who's first? Anyone want to volunteer, or shall I just select someone? Phil, Helen, you choosing someone for us to introduce themselves? Anyone? Yep. Who's first? Lindsay.
Okay, I'll go first. All right.
David.
Yeah, I'm going. Okay, hi, I'm Dave Pelling. I am from Lighthouse Tai Chi. We're based in Burnley. We operate in the sort of East Lancs area. And we've been, as a business, I'm full-time. I've been doing this for the last 10 years, and I've got a long history in martial arts. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, David. Who's next? Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I live near Ashbourne in Derbyshire, and that's at the southern end of the Peak District in the English Midlands, if you're overseas. I've been practicing Qigong for 18 years and teaching for about 11. I'm also a Qigong healer. And before COVID, I was heading towards semi-retirement, but now I seem to be teaching more classes than before.
Thank you, Lindsay. Next, who have we got?
Shall I go next? Hi, I'm Paula Charnley. I'm quite a neighbour of Lindsay's in the Peak District in the UK, although I spent 30 years in Amsterdam in Holland, so did some training there. I bring Shiatsu therapy, and I'm a yoga teacher and I'm a counsellor, so I combine all of those. And this year, of course, putting as much of that as I can online. So lovely to be here.
Thank you, Paula. JT.
Hi there, everyone. My name is JT Turner. I run a small company called Invisible Ocean Movement and Meditation. I teach Tai Chi, Qigong, meditation, and I also do a lot of work doing something called stage combat for stage and screen, and I'm a professional actor. So delighted to be here today with all of you.
Thanks, JT. Paul, I think we're going to get you up here. Come on, yes.
Hello. Hello, I'm the other Paul. I'm Paul Crawte. I teach Tai Chi, Qigong, Taekwondo as a martial art, and even Ukele in the village of Overton in Hampshire, which is in the south of England for those in other lands.
Thank you, Paul, for being brief. Now I'm just going to step out for a moment in order to introduce the...
You're up, Helen, Phil.
Hello, guys. We're Discover Tai Chi. We're Phil and Helen. We're based in Yorkshire. What do we do, Hal?
So we teach Tai Chi. We teach evidence-based Tai Chi. So we look after people with long-term health conditions.
And that's us, really. We'll let people get on. Let me come back to the main screen. And here we are. So I believe now we've got Anthony who needs to come in. But
we have, unfortunately, Anthony has just told me he's crashed, and I think he's trying to re-establish his connection. Perhaps it's something to do with being in so far away. I don't know.
Right.
I doubt it really. So in the absence, we do have another member. It's Anthony Guilbert, who is a mind-body practitioner based in Colorado. And I'm sure when he arrives back into the studio, we'll give him an opportunity to talk to us. But he's not there at the moment, so I'm going to try and keep it running. And what I'm going to do is introduce the first question for the panel. And it comes as a broad, and really what I want to do with this, I'm going to throw it out, and please, anyone on the panel, just gesticulate, and we'll bring the microphone over to you as soon as ready. So the idea is, what general strategies does the panel use to deal with the difficulties of life under COVID with your schools? That's it. It's very broad. It's very, very broad. And I just want you to talk very generally about the subject. So anyone would like to start off?
Go on. I'll jump in. So obviously, communication is the best thing. Keeping in touch with your students, however that may be, with emails, phone calls if necessary, just letting them know you're still out there. I mean, obviously, everyone's sort of moved on to online via these kind of streams or Zoom or whatever platform you use. And we've just sort of tried to move with that. And that's been a steep learning curve for ourselves. So probably very similar to everybody else. So if anyone wants to chip in.
So one of the things, I try to look at everything positively. I'm not always successful. But for me, the movement to almost completely, well, for me, being completely online these days, is that there is a wider audience that I can reach out and introduce Tai Chi and Qigong and meditation to. And perhaps some people that would never be interested in it, would never take a free drop-in class physically somewhere. All of a sudden, we're all at home and looking for things to do and ways to keep ourselves healthy. And so it does, to me, in my opinion, it opens the door to us to reach people that maybe never heard of us before. And especially people with physical challenges that might not have thought of any kind of exercise. For them to have an opportunity to watch and be gently introduced to this, I think could be a great thing. And that's the way I've been trying to run with it during the pandemic.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about responding to needs. So as we've evolved over the summer, my students, mainly my yoga students, have really let me know what they want. So I started to put out some different themed videos and information like neck and shoulders or for sleeping. And now they're really coming thick and fast. So my students are asking me, Paula, can you make a video about this? Can we have a recorded session weekly? So I'm trying as fast as I can to respond to those needs, which is very exciting.
Anyone else? Paul.
Well, I think Lindsay was there first.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what I've found is interesting is that I had a lot of older students before COVID, and a good number of them have actually struggled with the technology. I mean, my oldest student is 90, so I've moving online. I've lost some of my students. I'm still keeping in contact with them, and they say, oh, it'll be great when we can go back, to working in the flesh, so to speak. But what's been good is that other people that I know who are interested in doing Qigong with me, who are around the country, then they've been coming to classes, which is good. The thing that I have found as well is that I had more students during the first lockdown because people were at home, and now some of them have gone back to work and they haven't stayed on in the class. But I'd be really interested to hear what JT has to say about how he reaches out to people who haven't done Tai Chi and Qigong before. How's he actually reaching these people? Because I mean, I use social media, but I haven't actually got any. Well, I've had a few people who have expressed interest, but they haven't actually turned into people on screen yet. So I think that'd be an interesting discussion as well.
Paul.
Okay, so JT's up in the centre at the moment, but in general,
Get off. You pull the screen.
So in answer to the question, I think similar to perhaps what Lindsay was describing there, I don't teach for a living. I don't receive any income at all for my teaching, both in terms of the Taekwondo and the Tai Chi. I do it as a kind of part of my service, my community offering. So that means I can't give it 1 million hours a week, make it work. I've lost quite a few students who certainly can't cope with the technology. So what I've done in both the Taekwondo and the Tai Chi is taken the opportunities between lockdown periods to physically teach face to face, just grabbing those opportunities to keep people engaged who want to be engaged, and similar to what David was saying, keeping the communication up in between. One of the things I have done with the Tai Chi, just to mix it up a bit, is did a little session on Jian, Tai Chi sword, just to break it up a bit, just to give a bit of flavor to it. But I think for me, the main way of keeping on top of the challenges has been to grab the opportunity to do face-to-face teaching whenever that has arisen.
JT, do you want to come in now with the answer to Lindsay's question?
Yeah, and I certainly don't know that I'm an expert in all this, but my approach to it has been to use as many of the streams out there to reach people as I can. So when I first started during this pandemic, I would have a morning Qigong session. It was on Facebook. It was public. It was rebroadcast on several other Facebook channels. Paula and Lindsay, you were both great about helping me get the word out. And it was a simple 8 pieces of brocade introduction, and people noticed that and started joining in. And then something that was mentioned earlier, you know, listening to people's requests. So when I put out a request and say, if you have any physical issues, I'm not a doctor, but if you have a physical issue you'd like me to talk about, to share with you what other people have found in the Qigong Tai Chi world as beneficial, I can certainly do that for you. And people would write in about knees and shoulders, or I do a set to distress people. That's de-stress, not distress. Sorry. And I do things like that, and of course people are excited that you're addressing something from them, and they sort of join your band of followers, or hopefully they do. So it's for me, it was just getting the word out publicly as much as I could, and my morning Qigong was always free, and I did that, I think, for 4 months or something like that, and then off of that there have been groups of people that have stayed on and continued classes and instruction with me online. But I will still go out on my webpage and on Facebook rather, and do sort of a drop-in session about meditation or some simple movement, and you know, try to encourage people just by finding me, maybe accidentally finding me, but it seems to have worked positively for me. And I can't say that it works for everybody, but for me and my coteries, I guess, or the areas of impact I have, it seems to have worked pretty well. So that's my humble advice.
Anthony, microphone. Anthony, your microphone.
Yeah, I am sorry. I'm having so many problems this morning.
Okay. Do you just want to introduce yourself? Because I know that you dropped out earlier and you're back in. So maybe now is a good time just to say hi to everybody and a little bit about yourself.
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I am Anthony Guilbert. I am a Tai Chi Qigong practitioner, writer, author, and mind-body advocate working in the United States, primarily out in Colorado. And I'm happy to be here on the panel.
Thank you, Anthony. Can I just, before we move on, I've noticed that there's a couple of questions that have been coming in from Nicholas on YouTube talking about knee pain. Now, I know that this is a big issue for probably everyone, and we all in our different practices will have different ideas and solutions as to how to deal with this. But let me just remind ourselves that often knee pain is something that's avoidable, and it's taught often badly in martial arts, irrespective of which art you, and I can see Paul nodding and others. We've all through exceptionally poor training practices, and our joints do suffer badly because of that. So part of it may just be about rethinking the way that we practice rather than what the practice is. So who would like to jump in? Anthony, were you going to say something? Yeah,
I'll take this one.
Start off.
Okay, so Nicholas, I see here, I'm reading your comment that you have undergone some weight loss and are now still having some knee pain. My friend, I am in the same boat. I have vacillated in my life up and down with my weight. I'm a large man, 6'1". And when I'm not active, I do tend to put on weight very quickly. So I suffered a knee injury just a few years back. I have to say acupuncture, manipulation, and stretching to bring it back. You know, listen to some doctors and some people who really understand the anatomy of the knee and learn from that process. there are plenty of Qigong and yoga practices that will strengthen it as well, but work with some people who can help you understand how the knee functions. It was one of the best things I ever did for myself. Anyone else like to take this?
Yep. Anyone else would like to jump in here? Paul, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. I'd just be saying, reiterate what Anthony was saying there about seeking some external advice, and have in mind that nothing is worth wrecking your knee for.
Right.
You know, definitely don't be pushing it. If it hurts, don't do it. Well, I guess Matthew Rochford, one of my instructors, used to say, work within your soft limits. And listen to your body and take its hints, but go get some medical advice. It might well be that if you've lost a significant amount of weight, you had certain habits in place in order to manage that weight on your knee, and that those habits haven't gone, and that's doing you no favors. But I think the first thing to do would be to go and get some medical advice, and the second thing to do would be to listen to it.
If I could just very briefly add to that, there was a study done called, I think it was Let 1,000 Flowers Bloom at the turn of the century. I'll see if I can find a reference to it somewhere. And it was an investigation into the way Tai Chi teachers taught, particularly in the West, but also in the East. And one of the major criticisms of the report, and this is now nearly 20 years old, I think, was the instructions that teachers gave regarding knee joint postures specifically in Tai Chi. I noticed, Nicholas, that you don't actually mention the practice itself, but if I can assume that it's something along one of these practices, such as Tai Chi, the report was very, very clear in what it said. And one of those things was alignment, making sure that if you do a style of Tai Chi that has very deep postures, as you sink down, ensure that your knee doesn't bend over the foot. So that, okay, Tai Chi Chuan Yang style. Well, the Yang style, if it's the traditional Yang style, it will have much deeper and inclined postures than some of the other styles that are more upright and less sunken. So I don't want to generalize, but there are other styles that are less stressful on your knees. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't adapt your style to accommodate these structural needs for the knee not to bend over the toes. So when you're looking down, you should still be able to see the outline of your toes, or your toes preferably. If your knee has gone beyond that, as you sink into that posture, it's good. Also, you've got to look at the angles of the knees as they sink inwards or outwards according to the specific posture. And thirdly, there's an awful lot of postures traditionally, particularly in the traditional, more traditional Tai Chi versions, that require you to turn with the weight on the leg. Now, this is fundamentally a really bad practice for your knee joint. It's not built to accommodate that sort of strain, but it's something that is taught because it's there in the classical styles, and our adherence to whatever is classical, our adherence, our deference to whatever has been passed down from generation to generation, unquestionably following these practices on the basis that it's simply authentic and traditional is no longer good enough. We have the evidence in front of us. Some of these practices are unhealthy, and that includes the teaching of Tai Chi. And I say this as a Tai Chi teacher of 30 years. So I'll find out that report, and I'll try and leave a comment in the YouTube comments for you to have a look at it yourself. But do consider looking at those structural things yourself, and bear in mind any movement in the form, such as the turning kicks that carry the weight. Think about adapting that. And I would say that about any other posture in the form too. Okay, thanks.
Can I just step in and make a comment? Anthony mentioned acupuncture and manipulation, and as a Shiatsu therapist, I'd really advise as well the knees carry mind, body, spirit stories too. So good to work with somebody who can support you in all of those areas too. So not just looking at the physical, but looking at anything else that might be going on with your situation.
Thanks, Paula. Okay, we have other questions coming through. Viviana. Hi, Viviana. Nice for you to drop in. Thank you very much for doing that. She says she suffers from osteoarthritis and has avoided surgery with swimming and cycling too. Oh, very good, very good. Mentioned this epidemic because I put weight easily and I probably point out. Viviana, not sure what the question is there. Does anybody else like to chip in more onto this subject, or shall we go on to one of the questions that have been submitted previously? How does the panel feel? Anthony, I can't hear you. Paul seems thumbing up. Everyone else seems thumbing up.
I said I think we should move on.
Fine, let's move on. The next question then I'm going to suggest that we look at is something that Paul Crawte introduced. So we'd like him back into the studio for a second and I'll step out. Paul, can you introduce your question or do you want me to read it out for you? Okay, I'll introduce Paul's question. This was Paul's question, and then I'll back out and bring Paul in because I'd like him to suggest it. Paul asks the panel to share their thoughts and experience in making the body work arts of Tai Chi, Qigong, Yoga accessible to those who are at the moment unable to have physical contact. Okay.
So my question is primarily based upon working with survivors of physical and emotional abuse. And I'm inspired in my exploration of this topic by a friend of mine called Theo, who has actually just got a doctorate exploring yoga lineage. So I'm wondering if other panel members have thought about this and have a way of working with people that is respectful and mindful of the fact that they may be survivors in that regard.
I got an idea. Maybe we could start this. I would say crucial to all of this is permission. I've worked with some survivors of physical abuse and sexual abuse, and in class, simply asking for permission, it goes a long way because then the person allows you to touch them. I know training early on, it was very common for teachers just to walk up behind you, put their hands on you and correct their posture. But for a person who's suffered a trauma, that can be very devastating and very uncentering. So since we want to maintain that sense of center, I think I've always just defaulted to ask for permission. And then if they say no, get creative. Then how do you explain something without correcting a person by touching them? Anyone else?
I'll jump in here. So my partner is an intimacy choreographer, and especially in my work in stage combat, but additionally in the world of Tai Chi and Qigong and teaching people. I agree with you 100%, Anthony, getting permission before laying hands on, but also at the start of a play or taking on a student, it's great to have a one-on-one conversation with them and ask them what their boundaries might be, their limitations. And even when I get those limitations listed and I think I understand them, I will often preempt a physical adjustment if I'm working in the same room as a person with asking that permission again and saying something like, I'm going to adjust your right arm. Is it okay if I touch your elbow and wrist? And something as simple as that, because things change with people along the way. and sometimes giving people a physical or a verbal reminder of what you're about to do makes all the difference in the world. And people have different triggers. It may be the person says, yeah, no, touch me anywhere, adjust wherever you want to, it's not a problem. And then you go to touch or adjust their head, and they had forgotten that having anyone touch their neck, as an example, is a huge trigger for them. So I'm with Anthony. Always get permission before any hands-on work, but also a sort of introductory conversation with a student separate from the rest of your class, just asking them if they have any physical ailments, but also any physical limitations or discomfort.
Anyone else want to field that? Lindsay?
Well, I'd just like to say that before any of students start classes, I always get other practitioners may well do this, is I get them to fill in a health information form, which then asks them to list any physical problems that they may have. I always ask them as well, because it's a sort of set list, is there anything else? What I always find interesting is that they'll tick all the boxes or answer the questions, and then a week or 2 weeks later, even sometimes months later, something else crops up that they hadn't thought about or they hadn't discussed before. So that means that any movements that we're doing in Qigong, I always offer them an alternative to accommodate a physical problem. And I think, well, I'm sure this will come up, when we're talking about other things, is the thing that I find very frustrating about doing things online is that you can't see everybody. You might not be able to see any of the students. And so that if they're some sort of alignment isn't right, or you're not always able to offer them some alternative because they're not in that classroom situation. And that's the thing I find very frustrating, is that I can't do that. I'll try and I'll say things. I say, well, actually, if you're not comfortable, please sit down and do it. But it's not like being there and saying, well, actually, can I just move your arm, or can you just move your leg out that way, or whatever it is. Sorry, I think, yeah, I'm conscious I'm trying to keep to my minute.
I think it's really interesting question. Helen and I, when we've been teaching our classes and workshops before COVID, we never touched our participants. It was all verbal cueing. And it works really well, but it makes you work harder as an instructor, because you really, really do have to think about how you cue individuals. And I think Lindsay brings up great points in terms of how do you individualize that as well as talk to a group. And I think you probably all have lots of experience in terms of balancing that equation of talking to individuals while also helping the group as well. And it's a bit of a balancing act. Anyone who teaches in any domain, be it school children or students in any sphere, will be aware of this balancing act in terms of how we get our material across, and in what way do we do so, and what mediums do we use to support it. So I think it's an interesting question, and one that is very much a challenge for us as we go forward.
Yeah, I'd echo that as well. Using verbal cues as much as possible. Who's beeping? Using verbal cues as much as possible, and touch is the last sort of response, really. And then you've got to ask the question, because predominantly most of our students are of a certain age, 60 plus, and if someone's been bereaved, particularly, the last person that touched them would have been a loved one, So again, like we said before about triggers with touch, you've got to be very careful. And again, permission as always, isn't it? It goes without saying.
I'm going to bring Paul in, so I'm going to jump.
Hey, thanks for shoving me in. I'm just going to add a contribution from YouTube that's come in from Andrea, who says that her yoga students have a card on their spaces, green on one side and red on the other. If they want their own space with no adjustments, I presume physical adjustments, then they turn the card red side up. So this is a non-verbal way of presumably giving permission or not for those sorts of interactions. Has anyone encountered anything like that? I thought it was quite interesting.
No, it's very creative though.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrea. You've always got something interesting to add to this. Brilliant. Well, shall we move on to the next question? Panel, are you sufficiently warmed up? Great. I'm getting lots of... well, I think I'd like to follow on from what Lindsay was mentioning earlier, which was about the ideas of how technology is pushing us into this sphere of work that some of us find easier, some of us find more challenging. Some of us have the resources to plow cash into it and do it effectively. Others have less options in that department. But technology is leveling the playfield on one level. And it's almost assuming that as teachers now, that we will be able to do these classes online. We will be able to offer live or pre-recorded sessions, and that you will do it competently. But Lindsay makes an interesting observation that sometimes in our desire to be slick and professional in these presentations, we lose some part of our humanity in doing that. And I made a video a few years ago called My Best Teacher Was My Last Mistake. And in it, instead of presenting all the things that I wanted to teach, I just cut up all of the errors that I made in trying to do that video. The camera, the tripod falling over, me tripping up. Just as I'm going into the final move, some old guy walks past and farts behind me. And this endless list of errors. And I put it up on YouTube, and it still is one of the most popular videos on my stream. And so I think there is a need for us to connect with that human side. So I'd like to find out what you all think of that. Have I summed up what you were saying, Lindsay, or do you want to come in with a bit more first?
No, that's great, Paul. I think that's it. You know, we've had a steep learning curve, and I think I don't record every session that I do. I think in 9 months, I'd only have 2 sessions that I've recorded that I would say I felt went well. Either, you know, the internet didn't drop out, or, you know, I felt really confident in what I'm doing. I think maybe other people feel this, and some of you are much more experienced in presenting yourself. But as soon as I think, oh, I'll record this session, then it's almost like the step change in the way you think about it, because you're very conscious of the fact, well, someone else, you're going to be watching this after the lesson, and therefore you've got to be make a better job of it. You know, so I think 2 out of I don't know how many recordings is well, okay, that's good, but I would like to feel more. I think perhaps maybe I'm just not confident enough to do it. But yeah, it's yes. There's certainly lots of bloopers.
Does anybody else like to jump in on this subject? Yeah, David.
Yeah, no, because I say it's been a big learning curve. I'm not a tech person by any way or means, you know, and going from producing no videos or very few little video clips, we had to go suddenly produce 5 videos a week that were an hour long for the lesson, duration of the lesson, and making it feel like the lesson. So, and because of my limited tech at the start, I just did it in one take. So you get all the mistakes, you get all the ramblings, you get all the off-topic, off-piece stuff. And again, like I say, a tripod falling over, or the window cleaner, or the garbage truck going past. Yeah, and I'd make a point to say, look, life is still going on outside. We're still doing our thing, and I'm in my front room talking to no one because it's pre-record. I'm going mad, but I'm expressing it out by trying to do my classes. So it's quite an experience. And because I had to do 5 a week for the duration of that first lockdown, I gradually improved. Well, I hope I did. Anyone else?
Anyone else want to jump in? Paul?
Really echo some of what David said there, particularly the thing about I'm going mad. I guess there's a difference as a musical performer, and performers amongst us, JT, you might recognise this as well. There's something about being live and that intimacy, even I would suggest over cameras into voids where people may or may not be watching. They may have it on their screen and be making a cup of tea, or maybe they're studiously making notes. And that zeitgeist at that time, that feeling, that way of being at that time doesn't translate to it, the same thing being watched back recorded, I suggest. And I think that's because of an imposed sense of connection. If I can't see you and I can't feel you, so audience out in YouTube and other lands, I can't see you. Your comments are great, so we know you're there. But I force a connection. I feel a connection with you, and I'm not sure that works then when you play it back. A live gig recording that works is particularly special. Because it transcends both the live and the recorded sense. So I think we can give ourselves a break when we watch ourselves back and we cringe, not just at knocking the tripod over, but also at rambling off on tangents. That's the nature of live, I think.
I'd agree with you, Paul, and all the comments. We've started from zero in lockdown 1, all the way back in March, shooting live streams on our mobile phones in our kitchen. And as David said, and other folks have said, we made huge rambling mistakes, and we just involved our participants in those mistakes. And actually, they really enjoyed that idea that we were learning together and they were on the journey with us. And hey, if we managed to do some Tai Chi, that was a bonus. But actually, it was more of a kind of TV show with me and Helen, as the Fall Guys. So I think that there's something about that just authenticity. I know it gets used a lot, that word, and it can sometimes feel a bit of a cliche. But for your particular niche of audience, that's right, they like you. They chose you, David, or they've chosen you, Paula, or Lindsay or Paul. They've all chosen you because they like you as much as they like the actual arts that you're teaching. And I think that's something to hold on to, that the reason why people stick with us is that they actually like us.
I'm just going to agree with what everyone has said. You know, less than 5 minutes ago, you all met my cat who decided to walk across the screen. There are so many teachers out there, especially here in the United States, that have to be teaching full classes from home. And I do some work in the corporate world, and I talk to people that have to do this sort of thing suddenly. And I remind them, you have to be gentle with your students. Everyone is living an entirely different life, and you have to be gentle with yourself. You're going to wake up one morning with no internet, or overly tired, or overly booked, or your cat's going to walk on the screen. Something's going to happen, and you can either make it a big tragedy or the merriest thing that has happened to you that day. And if you bring that perspective of gentleness to the people you're teaching as well as yourself, you'll be far ahead of the game. That's my opinion.
I'd like to field this if possible. We're kind of bouncing around in the YouTube chat room over here about what we're really touching on is the idea of authenticity, which is one of those Taoist elements that's often forgotten in kind of the brick and mortar Tai Chi business. Authenticity is a major part of understanding the Tao, and I think it is also, for me particularly, kind of touching back on that first question that we had, a major strategy I use for coping with times of stress. Is just to remember to stay as authentic to myself and my beliefs as possible, but then also to express a certain level of authenticity to those that I'm dealing with. How do you folks see that? Paul's nodding.
Yeah, I hear that. I think actually it hadn't occurred to me to to think on the purpose beyond it just being authentic. But no, I think that's a good point. Yeah, it's all part of the Tao, and if it isn't, that also makes it part of the Tao.
That's right. Let's throw a paradox in just for fun. I think Paul Reed wants to jump back in. So Paul, why don't you take me out and pop in? Or somebody.
Hi, thanks, Anthony, for keeping an eye on that post. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in there because it's linked to almost everything that we've been talking about in this lemming-like rush to embrace the technology as a means to somehow or another scramble back into some sense of normality. Let's by all means try and reconstruct another version of what we had before, but online. And I'm not sure that's necessarily the direction we need all to be going in. There are good things about the technology that I, as I said at the very beginning, I believe can teach us about how we teach and the way that we are consumed by our students. But this idea of authenticity comes right the way back into the forefront again when we're having to face a camera and we don't have an audience out there. And like David was saying, like Paul was saying, like JT was saying, if you can embrace all of those elements around you and make that part of the presentation, then it will flow harmoniously in the way that Anthony talks about the Tao being something that we can all tune into. Well, I believe we can do that once we stop trying to be something that we aren't. And that's the really complex issue, because the internet and social media are pushing us all in the opposite direction. They're all trying to persuade us that we can be something else in order to maximize thumbs up, in order to get more likes, in order to get that advert working for us, to get more followers, to get more people on our page, to get more people who might sign up to your course, to get etc., etc. But once you recognize that's just a marketing ploy and you let go of it, I think your own inner self comes much more to the fore. And that if you can allow it to come and you can be brave enough for it to come out, you will find that you have an tsunami of charisma and enthusiasm and energy and personality that each of us has, but we've just been told to hold it back for a whole manner of false reasons out there. So let me just throw that out to you, and then I'll back out and leave it with you. Anyone else want to come in?
Yeah, can I just say that I totally agree, because went back to what Lindsay said about trying to get the recording right. And, you know, I think we've probably all had a massive learning curve and come on a lot. But it takes away the best thing about the way that I am with my group. It takes away that spontaneity and that going with the flow and just really feeling the energy and the sighs and the giggles and all of that thing. So I just feel like I'm on the verge now of, okay, I've got the recordings going quite well. So, okay, now bring back the authentic me, bring back that part that's fun, that's really tuning in with the people who are there at the other side of the camera.
One thing that I usually do in my class, and that my online class, is that we almost always have a little break, even if it's only for 5 minutes. And sometimes I just pop out of the room and then let the students talk amongst themselves. And I really like that, because that gives them sort of the ownership of the class, like they would have in a classroom situation. And I'm really pleased, because they've actually become really two nice groups now, and it's become really friendly. Obviously can't meet in the flesh, but I really like they really like that, and I like that, and it's nice. Then I'll come back in. So yeah, and that to me, that works really well. And just one other thing I'd like to say is that the thing that's really surprised me about this is I thought, well, we're not in a classroom situation. We won't feel the chi. But actually, most of the feedback that I've had, people saying it's not the same, but we're still feeling the chi. I always have a healing, we always do a healing circle. That works really powerfully. People have said, yeah, I felt the chi in the healing circle, which to me is just amazing. You know, that it's, I mean, I know I've done distance healing, but I think that's something that's really, really, well, it's made me feel great. I don't know what other people's experience of that is.
All right. In the face of silence, I've re-injected myself back into the panel.
That'll teach us never to be quiet again, Paul. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce a change in direction suddenly, because there's been a number of questions coming up on YouTube that Anthony's been bringing to my attention. So I'm going to introduce these here and link them to one of the questions that was submitted earlier in the week. And that goes back to this idea of Zoom classes. This, as I said previously, this knee-jerk reaction when COVID hit, which was for suddenly every instructor in the world, no matter what you were practicing, whether it was swimming or alligator slaughtering or I won't think of anything else. I think that's the two most absurd ones I think. Suddenly we're presenting courses on Zoom, how to do this. And really, really, you know, interesting stuff. But I'm not suggesting that we stop there. Very often the criticisms of online teaching are based around this idea that is that all there is to it? You know, this idea of sticking yourself in a camera with 30 small squares in front of you that you can't see what they're doing. You're hoping that they can see you, but it's all going to depend on broadband widths and anyway. So you get my impression. My idea is, so what is it that we can do that will encourage our students to go beyond this very simple approach to substituting something that was in a real life classroom to something like Zoom? Because Zoom is an attempt to reconstruct it, but it isn't the same thing. It's clearly not the same thing because of all the reasons we've talked about. So are there other ways in which we can use technology to expand that learning experience and make things easier for us as teachers, more authentic, if you like, and useful for the student without having to try and replicate what we had before? Going back to this idea that technology is not just about reproducing what we've had in the past, but exploring what we can do in the future. And I'm going to back out and I'm going to try and see if I can get Anthony to come in, because I know he wants to talk specifically on this, but I'd like you to think about it and everyone to chip in if they've got some.
Well, I'll chip in while Anthony comes on board. Hi, Anthony. It's interesting. I think there's a lot more on-demand content that's now being put out there. So rather than just replicating live content, there's the whole on-demand market. And I can think, again, over the years, how much I've learned simply watching YouTube videos on all kinds of stuff. And there's no feedback from the teacher, whoever that is, because rarely do I interact with that YouTube person. I simply watch their YouTube clip, learn something from it, and go away. And I've learned something, and there's no interaction. And actually, I wonder if a lot of people quite like that idea that I don't have to interact with the teacher. So I'm going to leave it at that.
I think a lot of people are doing that. I have a friend of mine who's doing some stuff on Vimeo behind a paywall. So you do a monthly subscription and you watch his videos and you can take it everywhere. And I think that's a brilliant approach to some of the things that were going on. As an academic, some of the stuff that we're playing around in the university has been inspiring me to rethink them in terms of Tai Chi and Qigong. One of the things that we're doing is hybridizing classes so that we're meeting less face-to-face and more, and shifting everything external or extraneous online. And one of the things I've noticed in that over a couple of years of using that type of process that I think would work really well in the mind-body field is that we could take a lot of extraneous and support material. Paul and I were having a conversation yesterday about the idea that, you don't need to repeat the same movement in class 10, 20 times. You show it to a student and then you put a video up on your website so that they can reference the movement and look at it. One of the things I've been amazed at, and I love hybridizing classrooms for this, is because I can link students together in that extraneous information and give them chat rooms to talk in. And then they start to form what we would call in the industry a community of practice around the idea of the form that we're doing, or the meditation that you're teaching, or the idea that you're introducing in class. They get to then start to talk about it, and that deepens their understanding of A, the question, and B, how they would individually answer it. And then you can tap into that and add more material, so you can keep building this external community of practitioners away from the face-to-face experience, so that they don't always need you. And I think, and I know I'm getting a little long-winded here before Paul's going to tell me I'm past my 1 minute mark. I think that develops for students a greater sense of self-efficacy with the work. And so I'm going to let you guys noodle on that for a bit.
If I may, colleagues, Anthony, I think that's a fantastic idea. I'm not quite sure if it's going to work for my students, but I think there's a good opportunity to suggest it to them and see if they want to do it, and just have it in my back pocket as a continuous thing to offer. This idea of students being able to access thing on video. I teach Taekwondo, have done for a fair while. Back in the day, I learned all kinds of stuff, which was fundamentally giving other people a chance to kick me in the head because I was never very good. But it occurred to me when I started doing Taekwondo, my son did it, and so I sort of took it up so he could kick me without getting into trouble with social services. That you can go and watch a pumse, you can go and watch a kata, you can go and watch a form online now. And back in the day, I'd be in the class doing all this, learning it, go home and get it wrong, and then practice it wrong for a week, and then go back to class and get it perfectly wrong. And fundamentally, it's me being a middle-aged grumpy old git. These kids don't know they're born. They don't know they're born with video. So getting your students to engage with it outside of class, I have found to be really useful. But I think it's still, and perhaps even with your concept there, Anthony, I think there's still an issue about recognizing the needs of those who find engaging with this technology challenging or unattractive or whatever. And there's a danger that we might end up leaving them out in this as a result of this revolution.
I'd come in there and kind of pick up as well with Anthony and folks that, again, I work in a university as well. And actually, there's a really interesting big study that showed the difference between small groups working together without a facilitator and a small group with a facilitator. And I won't go into the research paper in depth, but basically the conclusion was that groups work better without a facilitator in the end.
You can't say that. My students are watching this. You can't say that.
I thought I'd just throw that in there. Just it's interesting. If we provide a clear task, the students actually performed better on the task without the facilitator being present in the room. So that was the research.
I'm going to back that up. I've seen the same research, and it is true. If you give students the opportunity to teach each other, you develop a lot of cohesiveness and a lot more commitment than you would get just having an authority tell them how to do it.
I think if I could step in and just add.
Can I just say something too? It's just making me think about distance learning. So that, as you just said, Anthony, that small groups are coming together. So that also takes care of people maybe that aren't so great with the technology, but somebody else in the group, maybe it's people who work together, or for example, I was working with a family, so there was like 5 of them doing breathing exercises. So not everybody needs to be the one who's in charge of the technology. So just seeing groups like that work together, maybe some of it's online lessons on Zoom, and then some of it's just self-study or self-practice at home.
Thanks, Paula. I think that's this conversation has an awful lot of offshoots to follow, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going with any of it really, but I would like to refer very briefly to the idea of learning in peer groups. And one of the things that's always motivated me to teach was to try and break down the strong sense of hierarchy that exists in the martial arts ever since I first was introduced to them at the young age of 11 in a judo kwai down in Kent, and ever since then in dojos and in training halls since for the next sort of 30 years, I was hit by this sense of incredible authoritarianism in the classes, in which knowledge, or what was called wisdom, was passed down from above to below, and that anything that came from below upwards was dismissed merely because you were a white belt and someone else was an orange belt, or they were a 3rd dan and you were a 1st dan, or they came from Japan and you were born in London. And there was all this stigma and status and hierarchy in there that prohibited this free flow of learning. So we couldn't learn from each other because we were never given the permission to do so. It always had to come from top down. And I think that's always been a major problem with learning in the arts for me personally, and one I've tried to encourage and eradicate from my classes by encouraging as much as possible peer group teaching, so that whenever anyone joins a class, one of the first things they do, one of the first things they learn is to pass that on to someone else, errors and all, because I think that's all part of the same process. I've lost track of why I was saying any of that. Apart from the fact I just had to say it. So yeah, is that just me discovering that sort of authoritarianism in the arts? And I'm not suggesting it's always there in all of the arts, but certainly in a lot of the martial arts, this sense of deference to these strict layers of authority, and an inability to do anything other than just consume and reproduce, even to the point whereby it was only possible to reach that level in karate if I could perform the kata. I'm sure Paul would probably agree with it. If I could perform it the way that my sensei performed it, because if I tried to do it my way, it would be dismissed as being wrong. It had to be done the way Beer Gut over there used to do it, and so there was all this strange politics that went on that never got spoken about, never ever, and still, is there insidiously in the arts. Paul,
I think, I think there's a couple of points to that. One of which is that the advantages of some of the advantages of the external arts and their traditions is that as different students took on the teachings and went elsewhere from their teachers, that the same technique was applied differently because of their height, their weight. So, this became a strike to the nose, or actually it became a strike to the jaw, or it became a strike, just depending on the physicality of the student taking it on. And that maybe that's part of what you're talking about when you're talking about students sharing their learning and their I don't know, mistakes might not be the right word, but their adaptations of. I think there is a danger though, and this comes to a little bit one of the questions in YouTube. I think there's a danger of people only teaching themselves and only learning their own thing, be it from Zoom or be it in a class, and deciding that this is what it means. So I teach ukulele, and I love it. And what I see is students who honestly think they're doing this, but they're doing this. It's a bit like when mobile phones came into teaching Tai Chi, you could film people's feet and go, look, that's what you're doing. You know, you think you're doing this. When I teach people to juggle, I've got an art of showing them what they're doing. You're doing this, you know, you think you're doing this. So there's something about people being able to, somebody being able to demonstrate to somebody, actually, you know, you think this is what's going on, but you know, you need to, if you're doing this, you know, come back and think of this, relax your shoulders more, relax. So there's something about having that core teaching, which is respected and goes around. I'd also add that as a Taekwondo instructor, you do need some deference in the hall, because when people are throwing kicks and punches about, you don't want people running across the hall ignoring the rules. You know,
I'm not suggesting you shouldn't have any rules or regulations. I just feel that they should be democratically come about by, rather than just inherited from some 17th century feudal system. David, did you want to come in?
Yeah, it's my experience of the martial arts, pretty much like yourselves. You know, it's all about the master did it this way, so you've got to do it that way. But I was always a bit subversive. I always used, when I got to a certain stage, or mid-ranking, if you will, in the system, I went off, tried out what I'd learnt elsewhere, other clubs, other styles. And I always notice you get people coming into a club who've never done anything before, but they might have done something else, and they will show you something, and you'll observe that, because the senior students say, oh, look at me, look at you do this, and they'll hit them. And they go, oh, you hit me wrong. You know, the old classic, yeah, you hit me wrong, kick me wrong, that sort of thing. And I always thought, yeah, you can always learn something from a beginner. So doesn't matter what belt you're wearing, what silly pajamas you got on, you can always learn something, and don't ignore people down there whilst trying to learn what the people up here are trying to tell you. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Lindsay, were you chipping in with something?
Well, yeah, I'd say that because I've worked with just 2 teachers, I've done other courses and things. But I think if my first teacher now came to one of my classes, he'd recognise the core, because I still teach basically that. But it is adding my own adaptations. And the thing is as well, particularly if you're working with students who have some sort of disability, or they can't do the movements because they have bad arthritis, or you know, they're or particularly older students, but not necessarily. Then you have to offer adaptations. And also, I've found that because I always do meditation at the beginning of my class, which I've sort of taught myself. I brought into the class because a student said, "Can we do some meditation?" Become an integral part. And now I actually, and working with my own Qi, I now have, part of some of the movements that I do, I have invented myself. I haven't actually invented them. I bought them. And it was very interesting that when I went to, on a 3-week retreat in Spain with Daisy Lee, who is a famous Qigong teacher, one of the movements that I'd invented and given it this name, it was exactly the same. She has the same movement, same name. So, you know, it's, I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but yeah, so I don't follow a strict lineage. When I teach 8 Silk and Brocade and Zhanzhong, I learnt that from a different teacher, and I teach much what he did. But certainly for the core of it, it's an adaptation of what the 3-year training that I did.
You know, in a way that this goes back to the very beginning, that if we are to embrace this technology rather than merely try and use it to replace what we had before, and as Anthony was talking about earlier, the the way that we can fuse this hybridize it. If we were to use a library of data, for example, katas or basic stepping patterns or arm movements for beginners or angles of in Tai Chi, it becomes absurdly dull to repeat ward off left 240 times in the same couple of months. There's a limit to you wanting to just repeat over and over and over again. I don't care how many times or how much interesting the art in itself is. If you can push some of that to one side and keep it as a library that people can access whenever they want to, perhaps, just perhaps, teachers will free their time up to explore other options of learning and how we can create a new discussion between ourselves and our students and really learn to listen rather than speak all the time. He says, as someone who's speaking far more than his minutes worth. But that idea of really listening to what the students are looking for in your class, rather than go in with your agenda, go in with an open mind, watch, and then decide what the lesson's about after spending 5 minutes watching.
Well, Paul's anarchist proclivities aside, we have a very interesting dialogue happening on YouTube in regards to how we actually do this. How do we shift, authority and purify it? And I just wanted to clarify a point, specifically reach out. Let's do a little shout out to Kind Words ESL, who happens to be running this thread. The notion here is the idea that we don't need to always be the authority in the classroom. In the academic sense, we don't always need to be the lecturer, always telling and sparking at students, that we create time for them to own whatever the content is, whether it's my English class or my Tai Chi class or my Qigong class or a meditation class, just giving them a little bit more space. And the notion of a hybrid, to tie this back to the beginning, is to take everything extraneous to the practice that you can possibly put online and still allow it to be effective and support the students outside of class, will then create small pockets of practitioners who are engaging with that material. One way you could do this, and again, I'm gonna get long-winded here for a second. One way you could do this is, say like right now in COVID, one of the realities I'm dealing with is that I cannot meet in groups of larger than 10, which means me and 9 students. But I can do that in multiple places. Now, luckily, I don't make a living doing this, so I'm not worried about trying to be 20 places a month or 20 places a week. But 2 or 3 places equaling out to, say, like maybe total 27 students, those 27 students who may be spread over a 50-mile area can meet together online and in the model that I had discussed earlier, interact with each other and with content that gets them thinking further about what we're teaching, and then gets them talking amongst themselves. And that creates a more richer dialogue, and it creates a better student, really, in the end. The student who's going to come looking to have looking for very specific answers to the questions that they have, and helping them understand the questions that they have as well, because they're now sharing these concerns in concert with others. So again, and by means, this is not a suggestion that we should all be doing it this way, but it is an idea as we, in another year or two, we're going to be past COVID, and we're going to have all these tools left. And we're going to be looking to say, okay, so how do we use this? Do we go strictly back to face-to-face class, or can we amplify the experience, by using what we've learned during the pandemic?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there isn't going to be a going back. So I'm going to wonder whether, again, from a learner's perspective, why would I want to now go with my local teacher when now I can go to JT now in Vermont and no longer have to go to Paul in his church hall, sorry, Paul, teaching Taekwondo or whatever, when actually I can now pick and mix basically across the globe and choose who I want and take all the little bits that I, as the student, want to say is going to inform my learning. I wonder if this is going to change some of the power relationships between teacher student, and even us who are teachers who sometimes think we're not in a power relationship. We are still actually creating power relationships, even benign power relationships. And I wonder now if students or participants are actually going to go, you know what, I only want to learn this bit from Helen and me, and then I'm going to head over to Lindsay because Lindsay's interesting and she's doing this thing. And then I'm going to pop over to Anthony in Colorado and he's got something interesting. But you're never going to be able to say, I've got a bunch of students now. You might have maybe a diaspora of people basically moving around the globe, tapping into different teachers to meet their needs, not our needs. And I wonder if so much of what we profligate, and here's a kind of black hat question, is actually it's meeting our needs as teachers rather than meeting the needs of participants. So I'm just going to throw that out there as well as a little bit of a challenge to us. Go on.
I think it's always been that way. I mean, let's face it. I'm on a personal relationship with some of the A level players in America. Okay, I'm going to really shoot myself in the foot right now with my own teachers. They farm their communities. Let's face it. They build mailing lists. They sell books. They farm their communities. And my students will inevitably move on if they want to become teachers and go to teacher training programs that I went to. And I will lose them. And I think what you're talking about is a beautiful evolution in the sense that old model of the teacher as father figure, sensei, which really means father in Japanese. It's a derivation of the word for father. And sifu in Chinese is the same way. The notion that it is your parental figure, that should drop away. We don't exist in that culture anymore. Those cultures are gone. They're not even existing in China, really, or in Japan. And this is where, again, we're going to get real sacrilegious here. I think to undo the power of the teacher only benefits the student. To recenter the need in the student, so the class is really not about me, my traditions, my lineage, and all of that nonsense. It becomes about the student's own self-actualization, the student's own ability to grow. And if they can pick and choose, and they do it correctly, I mean, let's not forget that having a good base is the only reason. I mean, I grew up in Manhattan, so actually, in Brooklyn, but still, the point is that I could go over the bridge, go into Manhattan, go down to the Lower East Side, and there was a Chinese studio, and I could walk X amount of blocks that way, and there was a Zen spot. I could walk X amount of blocks that way and study Tai Chi, and watch those crazy Jamaicans doing that's capoeira in the park, and that was the culture that I existed in. But it wasn't until I had a solid base and a certain level of body wisdom that I could go and move around between those. So I think we're going to split the difference here. Students need to learn good, solid foundation, and then you can go to YouTube and pick up things. I mean, Phil, you said before that you were looking at forms on YouTube. Well, you wouldn't be able to do that effectively if you didn't have a solid foundation. So as much as I want to empower students, I don't want to get past the point of, learn your foundation, develop a solid foundation, and then grow. And grow how you need to grow, not how your teacher needs you to grow.
Perhaps the idea now then is for us to, in this new world, instead of us to traditionally hang on to our students from the first time they ever walk across the threshold of your dojo or your training hall or your village hall or your adult education class, and hang on to those people until their last breaths as your exclusive sifu guru master that they will always come to for your wisdom. The idea is that, you know, we adopt Lenin's approach to the state and allow ourselves to wither away as our students become competent in the skills that they learn, so much so that they can see through a lot of our nonsense and go and look for the real stuff elsewhere.
I wouldn't impose the same meaning to people coming to your class across the group. So I wonder if people come to study Tai Chi because at last someone's running a Tai Chi class in the village, or if they're looking for something to do and they tried yoga and it kind of didn't work for them and they've heard about Tai Chi, and they buy into, I think we were saying earlier, they buy into you as a teacher, and then they buy into the group. And actually, it could be anything. You know, you could be running a Pilates class. You could be running a myriad of things which satisfy this desire to be moving and shifting. And they're not necessarily interested in cracking the art. I mean, I've got students who just do not know the form after 2 years because they won't practice at home, despite my jovial attempts to get them to do so. And it's because although they love Tai Chi, which is great, they're not wedded to it in the same way. They're not. They haven't bought into my version of loving Tai Chi. So I'd be nervous of that. I think that although it would be great for students to be like was being said, have that base, and you said, have that base skill level, and then go off and learn from here and here. A lot of students, I think, just fancy something to do on a Monday night, and this really suits them, and they like the people who are there in the church hall in Hampshire, not over the other side of the Atlantic.
Well, over here, it's a very different game. I mean, in Boulder County, I am not unique. I have, in fact, my competition is, I've got BK Francis, 20 miles in one direction. I've got Ken Cohen up the mountain. I've got some amazing people down in Denver. If students come to me, it's because they buy whatever it is I'm selling on my website as being in line with their personal values, not because they're clearly better teachers, or teachers with better PR, depending on how you want to look at it. Yeah. I'm assuming nobody from America is watching this, so I'm just going to get all sorts of rowdy here.
It's like you said before, there will always be students who will go, pick and choose and go wherever they want. It's a percentage game, yeah? So that the number of students that walk in your door, the number of students that will actually practice and commit fully will be, what, 10, 50, 15% if you're lucky, for the older generation and other people you're talking. And then of that percentage, there'll probably be like 2% who'll really go for it and really search and buy books and all this kind of stuff. So it's always going to happen. And we just let them do it. I mean, we actively encourage people to say, look, if you want to learn about other stuff, like there's this great teacher over there who does this. I'm not the expert on everything. If you want to learn about, the Chinese medicine side, go and see this guy. Or even when our students move from our area, we try and actively get them into contact with a teacher in their area that they're moving to. So I sort of let go of that. I don't worry about it, because at the end of the day, they'll buy into what you sell, like you're saying, or they don't, and they'll find someone else.
So shall I jump in? Thanks for those last comments. There's a couple of questions in the chat, and I see them being linked together. Somebody asks about how do I see my counselling clients experiencing the COVID situation, and then Sonia's question, which says, what do we gain in being in the presence of each other? So not just being online. And so what I'm seeing very recently in people who are coming to me to talk, counselling clients, let's say depression or anxiety or not eating, lots of people who are, just don't have any appetite. And it seems to me that the very common thread is that they haven't realised how much they are missing human interaction. They're missing. They might be doing what we're doing on Zoom, and they might have had somebody's 40th birthday or 60th birthday on a Zoom call or a Skype call. But what I'm really seeing is that when we get to the core of it, they're not relating with other people. So they're not taking every single opportunity that they can to be with somebody, even if it's at distance, or step out of the house and go and find that group of people to do Tai Chi in the park. So it really feels to me that we need to remember why we love to be in the presence of other people, because we're human beings and we need to relate in different ways than being online. So to encourage people to take the opportunities when they can.
Well, I think that's about it. Paul would like us to wrap up, if I'm reading this correctly. So who wants to say goodbye first?
I'll say goodbye first. Thank you all so much, and I want to take out my soapbox and say to each and every one of you on this panel, thank you for your work. Thank you, because I have no doubt in my mind you have saved people's lives during this pandemic. You've touched people's lives. You've adjusted their trajectory, and I thank each and every one of you. Please keep your work.
Next.
I'll step in as we've got that silencing. Really useful for me. Some fantastic ideas coming in, ideas that I take and let percolate through my brain, and lovely to connect with you all, and all of those who've dropped in to watch our ramblings. Thank you for giving us a space to do that.
I'd like to say yes, thank you. It's been lovely meeting some of you for the first time, and thank you to Paul for facilitating this. I have to say I came on here rather reluctantly and with some trepidation, but actually it's been a really great experience, and thank you everybody. Lovely to meet you, and I hope those who are watching have gained something from it as well.
Yeah, it's been great experience. Thank you for interacting online, and thanks to the panel. Good to meet some new faces and connect with some other old faces that we've seen before. And one thing, if you're out there, keep practicing.
Yeah, thanks everybody. What a very rich conversation, and wonderful questions in the chat, and wonderful questions to share, and noticing just how everything weaves into one another. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and yeah, I hope to be able to do that again. Thank you, Paul, for setting it up.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. Thank you, Phil and Helen. Thank you, Paul, for putting this together. I've really enjoyed meeting the panel. And thank you, everyone who's listening and watching, for taking the time out to engage with us. And I hope we've done a good job at answering your questions. Be safe out there. Stay quiet and be at peace. Take care.
Well, you know, let's all do a goodbye together mutually. I think everyone said it also well. I've really go on then, interrupt me.
Sorry, Paul. Yeah, we've had our mic muted, and so we've been trying to chip in, and obviously, yeah, hey ho. Go on, Helen.
Well, sorry, I was just going to say yes, thank you so much again to everybody, and everybody that's joined in on the chat as well in YouTube. I think that shows that it's a great opportunity to meet online, for students to kind of really engage, as we were saying, to change the power dynamic, which I think is a really important reflection to take away from this session. And yeah, it's just really nice to hear people's thoughts and reflect and take away all that learning. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been fascinating listening to the discussion while trying to push buttons and keep track of everything. It's a bit of a minefield doing that as well. So that's been a good learning process in itself. And just for discourse of conversation is always good when you begin to bring a bunch of people together and you begin to start to hear different points of view. There's always good stuff in having that discussion going on. That's kind of where it all really exists. So thanks very much, Paul, for inviting us.
Well, thank you all for participating and contributing in such a useful and stimulating way. One of the things that I'll take from this is clearly that we didn't even begin to scratch a whole number of surfaces that we had hoped to touch upon. And that just leaves more material perhaps for us to come back in the new year with another possible opportunity to bring us together and talk further on some of these issues. So lots still to deal with, lots still. And once again, thank you to everybody who participated on the submitting questions beforehand, that went to Eventbrite and got the tickets. That all helped us get an idea of how many people we will be dealing with, and those that came to YouTube, as well as obviously the esteemed panelists. Thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Take care.